"Get your hands off my property. This is my house," I shouted, my voice hoarse but firm as the flashing red and blue lights danced across my front porch. 2 police officers stood in front of me, hands hovering near their belts, eyes glancing nervously between me and the group of HOA board members standing smugly behind them. One of the women, tall with sunglasses pushed onto her forehead, pointed toward me like I was some trespasser. "He's not supposed to be here," she barked. "He just moved in without approval, no paperwork, nothing. We called you to remove him immediately." The older of the 2 cops turned to me. "Sir, do you have any ID, proof that you live here?" My heart pounded, not from fear but fury. How dare they? Slowly, I reached into my faded jacket pocket and pulled out my old brown leather wallet. My hands trembled, not because I was scared, but because I had arthritis. I fished out the thick, creased paper that proved I owned the house outright. But before I could hand it over, the second officer stepped forward. "Sir, we'll need to take you in for questioning if you can't comply," he said, hand inching toward his handcuffs. I stared at him. For a moment everything froze, and then I said quietly, "You have no idea who I am. My name is Walter D. Langston. My father built this entire community from the ground up." Gasps rippled through the board members, but before anyone could speak, I turned to the stunned officer, holding out the proof. And just as his hand reached out, a deep voice interrupted us from behind the crowd. "Dad, what's going on here?" And that, my friend, is where everything began to unravel. It all started 3 weeks before that day. I had just retired, officially, after 50 years of teaching at Jefferson High. I packed up my things from my small apartment in the city, said goodbye to my tiny balcony garden, and told the pigeons they could have the place now. My son, Thomas, helped me load everything I owned into a small U-Haul, and we drove 2 hours to Pine Hills Estates, the community my father had designed nearly 60 years ago. My dad, Gerald Langston, was a black architect in a time when folks like him weren't given the big opportunities. But somehow, he managed to convince investors to back a vision. A safe, clean, friendly neighborhood for working-class families to live in peace. He poured his heart into it, literally. Every curve of the road, every park bench, every brick-lined walkway was part of his dream. My mother used to say he didn't just design homes, he planted hope. Dad passed away over 20 years ago, but before he did, he left me the deed to one of the original houses. Lot 37, a cozy, cedar-shingled cottage with ivy creeping up the sides and a giant oak tree in the front yard. I had barely been there 2 days when the trouble began. First, it was a note on my door, a printed letter with a smug tone. "Dear resident, you are in violation of HOA Article 7B. All new occupants must register with the Homeowners Association within 24 hours of move-in. Failure to do so will result in escalating consequences. Welcome to Pine Hills. Pine Hills HOA Board." I chuckled and tossed the letter in the trash. I wasn't just a resident, I owned the place, and not one of those board members had ever so much as laid a brick here. The next day, 2 board members came knocking. A woman named Clarice, who wore heels on cobblestone, and a man named Brent, who looked like he'd been waiting his whole life for someone to break a rule. "Mr. Langston," Clarice said, eyeing me like I smelled bad, "we noticed you didn't attend the new resident orientation." "I'm not new," I said, leaning on my cane. "My family been here longer than the HOA has existed." Brent gave a little chuckle. "Everyone's new until we say otherwise." They tried to pressure me into filling out forms, paying dues, and agreeing to inspections. I declined, politely. That didn't go over well. The following week, a landscaper showed up unannounced and began trimming my hedge without permission. I told him to stop, and he looked confused. "I was told to clean this place up," he said. "Said the homeowner was away." "I am the homeowner," I snapped. He packed up and left. Then came the citations. One for having an unapproved mailbox, which, by the way, hadn't changed since the house was built in 1965. Another for having brown patches on my lawn. One even accused me of having curtains of an unapproved color. My curtains were beige. It was obvious. They weren't targeting me because I broke rules. They were targeting me because they didn't like that I was there, an old black man in a neighborhood that had slowly changed faces over the decades. I tried to be understanding at first. I invited the board to tea. No one came. I tried waving during my walks. They turned their heads. When I helped a neighbor carry her groceries, I saw Clarice taking pictures from her car. So I stopped trying. Instead, I sat on my porch every morning, sipping coffee, reading the newspaper, and letting the wind blow the smell of my garden roses toward their fancy cars. Then one morning, as I swept my walkway, I saw a black SUV pull up. Out stepped 2 police officers and 3 HOA members, Clarice, Brent, and another man with a clipboard. They marched up like they were kicking me off the planet. "Mr. Langston, we're here to inform you that you are in violation of multiple HOA codes," Brent said smugly. "We've called the police to ensure cooperation. You'll need to vacate while we conduct a formal inspection." I stared at him, silent. Clarice added, "You've refused all our letters. You never registered. We have no choice but to assume you're occupying the property illegally." I laughed, out loud, not because it was funny, but because the nerve of these people, trying to evict me from a house my father built with his own 2 hands. The police weren't so sure, though. They started asking for documents, asking if I had ID, asking if I had proof. And that's where we began this story. With red and blue lights flashing, with neighbors gathering, with my son stepping onto the porch and saying, "Dad, what's going on here?" And just as Thomas reached for the officers to explain, the officer's radio crackled. And then everything changed. "Where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments." The officer's radio crackled to life, breaking the tension like a thunderclap. "Unit 47, dispatch. Stand down at 220 Pine Crescent. Repeat, stand down. Property is registered under Walter D. Langston. Legal owner confirmed." All heads turned. Clarice's lips parted, stunned. Brent's smug face crumbled. The 3rd HOA member, the one with the clipboard, shifted uncomfortably like someone realizing they made a terrible mistake. The officer holding my ID blinked, then looked down at the document in his hand, then back at me. Sir, it looks like everything checks out. You're the legal owner, our apologies." I didn't say anything. I just looked at Clarice. Then I looked at my son, Thomas, who stood beside me now, broad-shouldered, clean-cut, and clearly not someone you'd want to argue with. He had his phone raised in his hand. He'd been filming everything from the moment he stepped out of his car. "Dad," he said calmly, "do you want to press charges for harassment?" I could see Clarice's jaw twitch. Brent's eyes narrowed, and the man with the clipboard turned to walk away quietly, pretending none of this had happened. "No," I said slowly, my voice measured. "I don't want to press charges, yet." But I wasn't done, not even close. "However," I added, stepping down from the porch with my cane, "I would like to speak at the next HOA meeting." Clarice opened her mouth to object, but the officer cut in, now visibly annoyed. "That seems reasonable, ma'am. He's a legal resident." She had no choice but to nod. But that wasn't the end. Later that evening, as the sun dropped low behind the trees and the neighborhood fell into that quiet lull between dinner and bedtime, Thomas and I sat on the front porch with mugs of hot tea. My bones ached, but not from age. It was the kind of ache that came from holding your tongue for too long. "You sure you want to stay here, Pops?" Thomas asked, concern in his eyes. "I could find you a spot closer to us. I hate to see you going through this mess." I looked out over the lawn, the same patch of grass I used to run across as a kid, back when every house on this street was filled with laughter, community cookouts, and kids playing hide-and-seek. Back when my dad walked these streets like a gentle giant, respected, known, loved. "They're trying to erase everything your grandfather built," I said, my voice heavy. "If I leave now, they win." Thomas nodded. "Then I'll back you, whatever you need." And I knew he meant it. But the next day brought a different kind of challenge. I decided to go for a walk. The neighborhood, while fancier now, still had the same curves and corners I remembered. The trees were taller. The houses had more plastic siding than brick. But underneath the new paint and modern lawns, the soul of the place still beat strong. Or so I thought. As I walked past Lot 12, a woman I didn't recognize stepped onto her porch. Blonde, maybe mid-40s, holding a Starbucks cup like it was an award. Her eyebrows lifted the moment she saw me. "Excuse me," she called out. I paused, turning with a polite nod. "Good morning." She gave a thin smile. "Can I help you?" "I'm just out for a stroll," I said. "I live up on Pine Crescent, number 37. She blinked. "Oh, right, you're the one who moved in without HOA approval." The way she said it, like I'd committed a felony. I smiled, refusing to take the bait. "My name's Walter, and you are?" "Diane," she said stiffly, "HOA secretary." Of course she was. "Well, Diane, I hope to see you at the meeting," I said, tipping my hat slightly. "I have quite a few thoughts to share." She didn't smile, just sipped her coffee and turned back inside. So much for neighborly charm. By the end of the day, it was clear the news of my incident had spread. 3 more people avoided eye contact when I passed. 2 houses that once had cheerful porch swings now had blinds drawn tightly shut. The friendly Pine Hills I remembered was buried beneath something colder now. Controlled. Watched. And then came the retaliation. It started small. The next morning I found trash dumped on my lawn. Empty soda cans. A crushed fast food bag. I cleaned it up without a word. The day after that, my trash bin was knocked over. The lid's gone. Dog poop smeared near the curb. I still said nothing. But on the 3rd day, I walked out to find a large, red notice duct taped to my door. Violation notice. Unauthorized exterior paint color. You have 48 hours to comply or face HOA sanctions. I squinted at the note. Exterior paint. The house hadn't been painted in over a decade. It was cedarwood brown, same as it always had been, same as the original design. And yet now it was unauthorized. I'd had enough. I picked up the notice, walked back inside, and sat down at my dad's old desk. I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a thick, yellowed folder. The original Pine Hills development plans. My father's signature, ink faded but still visible, rested at the bottom of the master blueprint. I spent the next 2 hours gathering documents, ownership papers, design plans, the original HOA formation charter, which I still had from when Dad helped form it before the current group took over. Then, I typed a simple letter requesting to speak at the next HOA board meeting, citing my rights under the original founding documents. I made copies of everything. Then I walked down the street, knocked on Clarice's door, and handed it all to her personally. She opened the door just enough to take the envelope. Her face looked pinched, like she'd bitten a lemon. "This changes nothing," she said quickly. I smiled. "We'll see." I returned home, feeling like I'd taken back a piece of ground they tried to steal. But that feeling didn't last long. Because 2 days later, on the morning of the meeting, I woke up to the sound of water splashing. It was my backyard. My sprinkler system had been sabotaged. Water was gushing out from 3 broken heads, flooding my small vegetable garden. The tomatoes, which had just started to sprout, were floating. I rushed out with a wrench, barefoot in my pajamas, slipping in the mud as I tried to shut off the main valve. I finally got it turned off, soaked to the bone, hands trembling with anger. As I stood there, a slow clap echoed from across the fence. I turned. It was Brent, leaning casually against his porch rail, coffee in hand, watching like it was a game. "Nice tomatoes," he said. That's when I snapped. I stormed back inside, changed, grabbed my documents, and headed straight to the HOA hall. It was time to speak. The meeting was already in session when I arrived. Clarice sat at the head of the table, flanked by Brent, Diane, and a few others who looked like they were either bored or annoyed to be there. A small crowd had gathered, residents, neighbors, and a few curious onlookers who'd heard about the cop incident. I waited quietly until the community concerns portion of the agenda. Clarice looked up, clearly hoping I wouldn't speak. But I stood. "Walter Langston," I said, "owner of 37 Pine Crescent, son of Gerald Langston." That name sparked a stir. A few older residents murmured, one even gasped. "I'm here to share a few facts," I continued, unfolding my documents and holding them up. "This neighborhood exists because my father made it possible. These houses, these streets, even the park you renamed after a board member, he built it. For everyone, not just the ones who fit your rules. Clara shifted in her seat, trying to cut me off. Mr. Langston, this is not. But someone in the back spoke up. Let him finish. All eyes turned. It was Mrs. Greenwood. She lived here since I was a boy. She was in her 80s now, but still sharp as ever. She stood slowly, leaning on her walker. I remember when your father helped my husband build our porch, she said, smiling. I didn't know you were back, Walter. It's good to see you. A few others nodded. The mood shifted. I laid out my documents. I showed the original design. I showed my deed. I read from the founding HOA charter, how it was meant to be inclusive, neighborly, cooperative, not weaponized by power-hungry folks with nothing better to do. For a moment, I felt the room tilt in my favor. Until Brent stood up. Are we really going to let a man who refuses to follow the rules dictate how this community runs? Clarice jumped in. This is about consistency, about safety. If we let Mr. Langston do whatever he wants, everyone else will too. I raised an eyebrow. Is that what you're afraid of? People planting gardens and repainting homes with the original cedar tone? The room chuckled softly. But then Clarice played her next card. Well then, Mr. Langston, if you claim to know so much about Pine Hills, tell us what's buried under Lot 19. The room went silent. I stared at her. What was she talking about? Clarice smirked. You see, we've been doing a little digging of our own. That's when the projector on the wall flickered on, and a grainy, black and white image appeared. An aerial photo of the neighborhood, but Lot 19, 2 streets down from me, had a large red circle drawn over it. And Clarice's next words dropped like a hammer. Because, according to public records, that land doesn't belong to Pine Hills anymore. It belongs to the city, and it's scheduled for demolition. The crowd gasped. I froze. Because I remembered Lot 19. And I remembered exactly what my father told me was buried beneath it. I gripped the edge of the podium as Clarice's smirk spread wider. The room had gone quiet. Eyes bounced between me and the grainy image projected behind the board. Lot 19 circled in red, city property, scheduled for demolition, printed across it in bold letters. Brent leaned back in his chair like he'd just scored a touchdown. Diane crossed her arms, staring at me like I'd just been checkmated. But I wasn't rattled, not yet. Lot 19 was set aside by my father, I said calmly, scanning the crowd, making sure to keep my voice steady. He reserved it as a community green space. It wasn't sold, it wasn't developed, and it wasn't for demolition. Clarice tilted her head. Funny, because the current records say otherwise. It seems your family didn't maintain the taxes on it. The city claimed it 5 years ago. I clenched my jaw. That couldn't be right. My father kept detailed notes. After he passed, I paid taxes on every piece of land under our family trust, including Lot 19. I had the paperwork in a file cabinet back at the house. But if they had new documents, something shady was going on. Brent jumped in. And you know what's even more interesting? There's no record of that land ever being zoned for green space. No dedication, no signage. So technically, if it gets bulldozed, it's not our fault. He was enjoying this. Diane added, maybe someone forgot to update the system, Mr. Langston. But unfortunately for you, that land is out of your hands. My fists tightened, not in anger but in purpose. Lot 19 was special. That patch of earth wasn't just a green space. It was sacred. My father used to call it Memory Grove. He planted it himself. It held a ring of trees, 6 mighty oaks planted in memory of his war buddies who never made it back. Beneath one of those trees was a plaque, buried under the soil, engraved with the names of men who fought beside him in the 1940s. He never told the HOA. He didn't want bureaucracy touching it. He just quietly maintained the space. So did I for years. Even while I lived in the city, I visited, cleaned, trimmed, and prayed. And now these people wanted to pave over it. Not on my watch. But I couldn't prove anything yet, not in that meeting. So I stepped back from the podium and said only, I'll look into it. Clarice gave a condescending nod. You do that. The meeting adjourned shortly after. People trickled out slowly, talking in low voices. Some avoided me. Others patted me on the shoulder with quiet sympathy. But I noticed something new, two younger couples who whispered to each other with looks of concern. The seeds of doubt had been planted. Thomas was waiting outside the hall when I stepped out. "You looked like you were about to throw that projector," he joked. "I wanted to throw Brent," I muttered. He laughed, then handed me a water bottle. "We'll figure it out." "We need to go home," I said. "I've got documents that'll prove that land was never abandoned." We got in his truck and drove back to the house. The sun had started to set, casting long shadows across the street, but something felt off. When we pulled into the driveway, I saw it. The front window was cracked. I rushed out of the truck, cane in one hand, keys in the other. Inside the house, papers were scattered. A lamp had been knocked over. My filing cabinet, where I kept my father's original documents, had been forced open. Thomas cursed under his breath. "Dad, someone been here." I scanned the mess. The file labeled Langston Trust, Lot 19, was missing. "They knew exactly what to look for," I said, voice shaking. "Nothing else is touched." Thomas was already calling the police. But deep down, I knew how this would go. No forced entry, nothing valuable stolen, just papers. The police came, took notes, shrugged their shoulders, and left with a half-hearted promise to look into it. Meanwhile, the truth was disappearing. Someone on that HOA board wanted that land gone, badly, and now they were trying to erase every record tying our family to it. But I had one advantage. My father never trusted paper alone. He believed in legacy. And legacy lived in people. That night I sat at my desk with a notepad and began writing down names. Old neighbors, former board members, friends of my father. Some had passed on, some had moved away, but a few were still around, and I knew exactly who to start with. The next morning, Thomas and I drove to the edge of town, past the old train station, down a winding road that led to a brick house with a green roof. The mailbox read, Greenwood. Mrs. Greenwood answered the door with a cane in one hand, and a fresh apron tied around her waist. "Walter Langston," she said with a warm smile, "I knew you'd be back." We sat in her kitchen, sipping sweet tea, while sunlight streamed through her lace curtains. "I remember your father planting those trees," she said after I explained everything. "I was there. I brought him lemonade." "Do you remember if he ever filed anything official?" She shook her head. "No, he didn't trust the board even back then. Said some things were too sacred for red tape." I nodded. "I need proof, though, anything." She stood slowly and disappeared into her back room. A few minutes later, she returned with a photo album. Inside were black and white photos. One showed my father, young and tall, digging into the earth with a shovel. Behind him, a sign on a wooden post, "Memory Grove dedicated to the fallen." She pointed to the photo. "That was before they built half the back street. Your dad held a small service, said it was his gift to the community." My throat tightened. "Can I borrow this?" I asked. She nodded. "Of course, but be careful. People like Clarice don't care about history, just control." I thanked her and left. That photo, combined with a few others I found later, was a start, but I needed more, something official. So I went to City Records. It took a full day of digging through dusty boxes and scanning microfilm, but finally, I found a map. It was dated 1962. In the corner was a label that read, Lot 19, Reserved Langston Family Memorial Grove, not for development. Stamped by the city planning office. My hands shook as I made copies. That stamp, faded but real, was the key. If the city reclaimed the land, it was through error or manipulation. But while I worked, the HOA worked faster. That night, construction equipment rolled into the neighborhood. Bulldozers, survey trucks, orange cones. They parked outside Lot 19. Clara stood beside them, clipboard in hand, giving directions. Thomas called me in a panic. "Dad, they're breaking ground." I dropped everything and ran. And I don't mean walked, I ran. Cane in one hand, documents in the other, I stormed down the street as neighbors watched from windows and porches. The sun was setting. The machines rumbled to life. I pushed past the caution tape and planted myself in front of the bulldozer. The driver honked and waved, telling me to move. I didn't. Clarice marched toward me. "Mr. Langston, you're trespassing." "This land was dedicated to veterans," I shouted over the engine. "You touch this soil, you desecrate their memory." She rolled her eyes. "It's city land now, move." I raised my voice. "You didn't get city approval, I checked. You're using a private contractor without permits. This is illegal." She hesitated, then gestured to the driver. "Run it anyway." The bulldozer inched forward. People gasped. And then, a voice boomed from the end of the street. "Stop!" Everyone turned. It was a city official. Badge, jacket, clipboard in hand. He was walking fast, waving papers. Clarice's face went pale. The man walked up, furious. "You don't have the authority to begin demolition, and you definitely don't have clearance to override historical preservation." He turned to me. "Mr. Langston." I nodded. He handed me a stamped order. "A formal investigation has been opened. All activity on this lot is suspended effective immediately." Clarice's mouth opened, then shut. Brent stormed off. I looked at the bulldozer. "Turn it off," I said calmly. The engine died. And I stood there in the silence, one old man with a cane, surrounded by steel machines, proving once again. My family built this community. But I had barely taken a step toward home when Thomas caught up to me, panting. "Dad, I just checked your back gate." "What about it?" "It's open, and the garden." He stopped. I turned slowly, heart sinking. "The tomatoes are gone, every single one, and something's written on the fence." We rushed back together. When we got there, I saw it. In thick, black spray paint across my wooden fence were 4 words. "Leave or you're next." I stood frozen in front of the spray-painted words on my backyard fence. "Leave or you're next." The black paint dripped slowly down the wood like tears. My tomatoes, those bright, hopeful bursts of red, were gone, uprooted, stomped into the mud like trash. The soil had been ripped apart, and the small wooden stake where I tied up the vines was snapped in half. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. It wasn't just vandalism. It was war. And someone wanted me out of Pine Hills badly enough to destroy the last good thing I'd grown here. Thomas stood next to me, fists clenched. "We need to call the police," he said, already pulling out his phone. I placed a hand on his arm. "Wait. Wait, Dad, this is a threat. What if they come back? They want me to react, to leave. If I start waving police reports around, they'll spin it like I'm the troublemaker." He exhaled sharply. "Then what do we do? Just stand here and stare at it?" I turned and walked back into the house, without another word. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat by the window in the dark, cane resting across my lap, eyes fixed on the street, watching, thinking. This wasn't just Clarice and Brent anymore. Someone else had crossed the line, someone dangerous. And I had to figure out who. The next morning, I woke up early and grabbed the garden hose. I spent 2 hours scrubbing that message off my fence. The paint didn't come off completely, but I didn't stop until only faint smudges remained. Then, I replanted my tomato seeds, every last one. Thomas came out mid-morning, still tired. "You're not going to rest, are you?" "Not until this place remembers who it belongs to." He nodded. "Then let me help." We started making a list, not of enemies but allies. People who remembered the old Pine Hills, people who knew my father, people who were sick of the HOA. Our first stop was Mr. Levi's place on Oak Ridge Lane. Levi was in his 70s, bald, sharp-eyed, and a Vietnam vet who still wore his dog tags like a medal. I hadn't seen him in years, but he remembered me the second I knocked. "Walter Langston," he said with a grin. "Last time I saw you, you were running from your mom with a slingshot in your hand." I laughed. She never caught me. She never needed to. That woman could stop a moving train with just one look. We talked for an hour on his porch. When I showed him the pictures of the vandalism, his smile vanished. "I've been keeping quiet for too long," he said, "but it's time someone stood up to them." He joined us. Then came Rosa and Emmanuel, who ran the daycare center down the street. Then old Mrs. Carter, who once babysat me when my parents worked late. And then the Crawfords, newer residents, young couple with 2 kids, who said they were sick of the HOA fining them for things like leaving a bike in the yard. One by one, the voices grew louder. I decided to host a backyard community meeting. No clipboards, no dues, no power trips. Just chairs, lemonade, and truth. We invited everyone. Some didn't show, but nearly 20 people did. I stood in front of them, holding nothing but a photograph of my father standing under the oaks at Memory Grove. "I'm not here to make enemies," I began. "I just want to live in peace. But what's happening in Pine Hills isn't peace, it's control, bullying, fear." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. And I know I'm not the only one who's been targeted. That's when Rosa stood up. She held up a stack of papers. "These are citations we've received in the last 2 months, all for nonsense. And every single one came after we voted against Clarice's proposal to ban outdoor toys." A father named Malik chimed in. "They made me take down my daughter's swing set, said it was aesthetic. She cried for a week." Mrs. Carter shook her head. "They told me my porch chair was too old-fashioned. It belonged to my late husband." One by one, the stories came out. This wasn't just about me. It was a pattern. We ended the meeting with a plan to gather these complaints, write a collective letter, and demand a public forum to address them. Not a board meeting, a community meeting. We'd let the people speak. But as we packed up the chairs and walked guests out, I noticed a black SUV parked across the street. Engine running. Windows tinted. Watching. And that night things got worse. Around midnight, I was awakened by a loud bang. Thomas, who had been sleeping on the couch to keep watch, jumped up, heart pounding. We both rushed outside. Someone had thrown a brick through my front window. Glass shards glittered on the carpet. Attached to the brick was a note. "Last warning, leave now." Thomas called the police. This time they took it seriously. They dusted for prints, took the note, interviewed neighbors. But as always, no cameras, no witnesses. Just more fear. I refused to board up the window. Instead, I taped the broken glass together from the inside, left the curtains open, and placed a sign on the lawn. "I'm not leaving." The next morning, someone had added to it in spray paint. "You will." That same morning, I got a call. It was from the city records office. They completed their investigation into Lot 19. And what they found was disturbing. "Mr. Langston," the voice said over the phone, "we've uncovered some documents that show a forged signature. It seems someone attempted to rezone the land without approval. The name signed is yours." I nearly dropped the phone. "My name?" "Yes, sir, but it doesn't match your official signature. We're treating it as fraud." My stomach twisted. They weren't just trying to erase my father. They were framing me. I thanked the officer and hung up, my hands shaking. Thomas was already by my side. "What is it?" "They forged my signature to steal Lot 19. His eyes widened. "That's criminal. We're past HOA drama now. This is deeper. Someone in that board forged legal documents." I knew who I suspected: Clarice. But I needed proof. And I had a plan. We installed security cameras, discreet, solar-powered, hidden in the garden mailbox, even a fake birdhouse. Then I filed a formal complaint with the city's zoning office, listing the HOA board members as possible suspects in the forged rezoning attempt. They didn't take it lightly. That same afternoon, a city investigator showed up at the HOA office with a clipboard and a badge. And that night, something happened that no one expected. My house was broken into. Again. But this time they were caught. On camera. The footage showed a hooded figure slipping through the back gate. They wore gloves, moved with confidence, they knew the layout. And when they turned toward the garden light, the hood slipped slightly. It was Brent. Thomas and I stared at the footage, stunned. "We've got him," I whispered. We submitted the footage to the police and the city investigator. The next day, Brent was arrested for trespassing and suspected vandalism. When they searched his property, they found spray cans, gloves, a stolen HOA master key, and copies of my stolen documents. Clarice tried to distance herself fast, but the community had had enough. With Brent behind bars and evidence piling up, the HOA board was forced to call an emergency election. A recall vote. Neighbors began rallying. Old residents returned to vote. Younger ones who'd been silent started speaking out. Signs popped up across Pine Hills. "Take back our neighborhood." And the night before the vote, Clarice made one last desperate move. As I stepped out for my evening walk, I found something taped to my mailbox. A picture of my late wife. And beneath it, scrawled in red ink, "She's gone, you should be too." I stared at it, heart pounding. And then I tore it down, walked into the house, and sat quietly at the kitchen table. Thomas stood there watching me. "Dad," he asked softly. I looked up, calm but fierce. "It's time to finish what your grandfather started." I didn't sleep that night. The picture of my late wife taped to the mailbox, used like some twisted scare tactic, haunted me deeper than any brick through a window or vandalized garden ever could. Her smile in that photo, warm, soft, strong. The same smile she gave me the day we bought our first house. The same smile I saw the morning she passed. Now it had been weaponized. But fear wasn't going to win. By sunrise, I was dressed and waiting on the porch, cup of black coffee in hand, watching the sun rise over Pine Hills like I used to as a boy. I remembered how this community was born out of hope, carved from empty land, and built with bare hands and borrowed dreams. My father didn't design this place just with bricks and mortar. He designed it with heart. He believed a neighborhood should feel like family. And I'll be damned if I let it fall into the hands of cowards. By 8 a.m., the recall vote began. The city had taken over hosting it, held in the community rec center that my father had originally helped design decades ago. Long tables lined the hall. Voting booths were set up, manned by neutral volunteers from the county. Residents showed up in droves. Some came quietly, heads down, unsure if it would even matter. But others came fired up, holding signs, chatting with neighbors, and ready for change. I sat by the entrance, cane in hand, greeting everyone who walked through the door. For hours, I watched people I hadn't seen in years return, some with walkers, some with strollers, some who had kept silent for far too long. Diane, the HOA board secretary, showed up with sunglasses on, lips tight, not meeting anyone's eyes. Clarice didn't come. She knew the end was near. Thomas stayed by my side, acting as my strength when my old bones got tired. Even the Crawfords brought lunch, simple jollof rice and grilled chicken packed in foil containers. By 4 p.m., the voting ended. At 5:30, the results were announced. Clarice was recalled. So was Diane. So were 2 more members of the board. Brent was still in jail, his spot already disqualified. 5 seats all emptied. I didn't run for the board. I didn't want to be in power. But I did nominate Rosa, Mr. Levi, and a few others who had earned the community's trust the right way. As the announcements echoed through the rec center, a wave of cheers and applause broke out. Some people hugged, some cried. It wasn't just a vote. It was a reckoning. I stepped outside into the evening air, feeling light for the first time in weeks. But just as I reached for my car door, a small sedan pulled up and stopped in front of me. The tinted window rolled down. Clarice. Her face was bare now, no makeup, no glasses, no smug expression, just tight eyes and a clenched jaw. "You think you won," she said coldly. I tilted my head, didn't I? Her lips twitched. "You don't understand. Brent wasn't the one behind all of it, he was just the muscle. There are people above us, investors. They want this land for development. Lot 19 is just the start." "I have documentation now," I replied. "The city recognizes it as a protected memorial site." She chuckled dryly. "That'll only hold for a while. Money talks, Mr. Langston. They'll find a way. They always do." I stepped closer. "Let them come," I said softly, "because now the whole community is watching." She revved the engine. "Be careful, old man. You don't know who you're up against." And with that she drove off. Thomas rushed out, having seen her from inside. What did she want? I looked toward the dust cloud her tires left behind. "She's not finished." He frowned. "Should we be worried?" I looked back at him. "We should be ready." For the next few days, life in Pine Hills began to shift. Without Clarice's chokehold on the board, the new leadership began lifting unnecessary rules. No more citations for patio chairs or chalk drawings on sidewalks. Neighbors started coming out again. Kids played freely in the streets. The mood lightened like a cloud had been lifted. But I didn't relax completely. I spent my afternoons checking the cameras, walking the perimeter, replanting what had been destroyed, repainting the damaged fence. Neighbors volunteered to help me fix the front window. We rebuilt with our own hands, just like my father once did. Then came the letter. It arrived in a cream envelope, unmarked, no return address. Inside was a typed message. "We are the rightful owners of Lot 19. You have 1 week to vacate or legal action will begin. Heritage Realty Group." I had never heard of them. I brought the letter straight to the new HOA board and the city office. Turns out Heritage Realty Group was a shell company registered only 3 months prior. No office address, no phone number. Someone was trying to steal land through legal paperwork. The city began an investigation. A cease and desist order was filed. But that wasn't all. That night Thomas and I heard a loud thud outside. We rushed out, flashlights in hand. And there it was. The oak tree in front of my house, planted by my father, had been chopped halfway through. The chainsaw marks were fresh. Someone had tried to cut it down in the night, but ran off before finishing. I placed my hand on its thick trunk. Sap bled like tears. The tree groaned under its own weight. And then it cracked and fell right into the middle of my driveway. Neighbors came running, some with tools, some just to help. Together we cleared the debris, stacking the branches with care, moving the heavy trunk inch by inch. We held a small ceremony the next morning. I stood beside the fallen oak, hand over my heart, and told the story of how my father planted it on the day Pine Hills was officially founded. He said this tree would stand as long as we remembered what this place was built for, and even though it's fallen, its roots are still here, just like us. The crowd around me nodded. Some wiped their eyes. We carved a portion of the trunk and turned it into a bench, placed it under the other oak near Memory Grove, etched it with words that would never be forgotten. Built with heart, stood with purpose, never forgotten. But the week wasn't over. And on the 6th night, just before dawn, I heard another engine. Not a car. A bulldozer. I jumped out of bed, heart hammering. Thomas met me at the door. "Is that?" "It's Lot 19. We ran down the street, flashlights bouncing in the dark. And there, just past the curve, through the trees and into the grove, we saw it. A bulldozer. Engine running. No plates. One man inside, helmet on, foot ready to press the pedal. "No," I shouted. I stepped into the clearing. Right in front of the machine. The driver hesitated. Then revved. Thomas grabbed my arm, pulling me back. "Dad, he's serious." "He won't do it," I said, staring into the headlights. The engine roared again. I didn't move. And suddenly, bright lights flashed from behind us. City trucks. Police cruisers. The new HOA president, Rosa, running toward us with a signed injunction in hand. "Stop," she screamed. "This land is under preservation order." The bulldozer stopped. Police surrounded the driver, pulling him out. He didn't say a word. No ID. No name. Just a smirk before he was handcuffed and taken away. Later that morning, we discovered the machine had been rented under the name Heritage Realty Group. But there was still no trace of who was behind it. Only one thing was certain. This wasn't just about land. It was about power, control, erasing history. And I had a feeling they were just getting started. The sun was rising when the bulldozer finally rolled away, escorted by a police tow truck. I stood there in the clearing of Lot 19, my shoes covered in the soft red dirt of Memory Grove, heart pounding. The sound of birds chirping overhead didn't bring peace. It felt like a warning. Even though the bulldozer was gone, the message was loud and clear. They weren't going to stop. Thomas sat beside me on the bench we had made from the fallen oak tree, his arms slung across the backrest. He was silent, watching the trees sway gently in the wind. "We should install more cameras here," he said after a while. "Hidden ones, this won't be their last move." I nodded, already planning it. We spent the rest of the day reinforcing the area, working with a few volunteers from the neighborhood who now treated Lot 19 like sacred ground. The Crawfords brought their kids, who planted small flowers at the base of the oaks. Mrs. Greenwood brought tea and old photographs she found in her attic, one showing my father holding blueprints with community elders back in the 1960s. Those photos would become vital soon. Because less than 72 hours later, I received a lawsuit. Delivered by a private courier, hand-addressed to me. Inside, a thick packet of legal jargon and bold headlines. Heritage Realty Group, v. Walter D. Langston. Claim, trespassing, interference with land use, and obstruction of development. I held the papers in my hand like they were hot coals. They were suing me, the son of the man who built this community, for obstruction, for interfering with commercial progress, and worst of all, for defamation of corporate interests. It was unreal. Thomas looked at the documents and laughed. "They're bluffing. They don't even have standing. This company doesn't even exist legally, not in any real way." "I know," I said, "but sometimes it doesn't matter. All they need is a judge who's tired, a system slow enough for them to take advantage of." He sighed. "We need a lawyer." I wasn't wealthy. My retirement savings weren't meant to fight corporations. They were meant for peace, for gardening, for old records and books. But this wasn't about me anymore. This was about principle. And then something incredible happened. The community stepped in. Word spread fast about the lawsuit. Within 48 hours, neighbors had created a fundraising page. Small donations trickled in $10 here, $20 there. Rosa connected us with a local civil rights attorney named Maya Collins, who agreed to represent me pro bono after seeing the footage and reading the city reports. Maya was sharp, young black. Powerful voice, Ivy League educated, and zero tolerance for bullies in suits. "They messed with the wrong elder," she said during our first meeting, eyes blazing. "Let's go make some noise." She filed a countersuit for harassment, fraud, and property interference. She dug into the shell company's registration and discovered something jaw-dropping. Heritage Realty Group was tied to a major real estate developer, one with known ties to local government officials and a long history of shady land acquisitions. And guess who had once worked for that developer? Clarice. The pieces were falling into place. She wasn't just the face of the HOA. She was the gatekeeper for a larger plan to commercialize Pine Hills, beginning with Lot 19. The city had recently received a quiet proposal for a new development, a shopping plaza, apartment complex, and private parking garage. Right where Memory Grove now stood. It wasn't just greed, it was erasure. My father's work, my family's legacy, our home. All for a few fast dollars. Maya presented the evidence to the city zoning committee. She held nothing back. And in that moment, she became more than just my lawyer. She became our community's defender. But while Maya fought in court, something else happened on the ground. People started turning. Not against me, against Clarice's allies. The HOA board members who had remained silent, the neighbors who had looked the other way, the developers trying to sneak through the shadows. Now they were being exposed. Local news picked up the story. Headlines read, "Retired teacher battles developers to save historic grove." HOA corruption, Pine Hills residents fight back. A local radio station asked for an interview. I agreed. "I'm not doing this to be a hero," I told the host. "I'm doing this because my father believed in building places where people feel safe, where neighbors wave to each other and children feel like they belong. That's what's under attack, not just a grove, but the soul of our communities. The story went viral. And then, someone vandalized Maya's car. They keyed the words "Stay out" into her door. She didn't flinch. "They're panicking," she said. "We're close." Days passed. We waited for the court hearing. One night, Thomas was out late dropping supplies off at Rosa's. I stayed home alone. It was quiet, too quiet. Around 11:45 p.m., I heard something outside. Not footsteps. Digging. I grabbed my flashlight and cane, heart pounding. I followed the sound to the back of Lot 19, where the land dipped slightly near the oldest oak tree. And then I saw them. 2 masked men with shovels. They were digging into the ground, beneath the memorial tree. I stepped into the clearing and shouted, "Hey!" They froze. One dropped his shovel and bolted. The other stumbled backward trying to run. But he slipped. Fell into the hole. I shined the light into his face. It was one of the contractor's assistants from the day of the bulldozer. I snapped a photo quickly before he scrambled out and vanished into the trees. I called the police. They came, inspected the site, and what they found in the shallow hole made me go still. There, half buried beneath the roots, was a rusted metal box. It had my father's initials on the lid, GL. They pried it open. Inside were water-damaged papers, sealed plastic folders, and a leather-bound notebook. My father's journal. Inside were pages and pages of handwritten notes. "Memory Grove will not be sold. It belongs to the people. In case of trouble, trust Walter to fight." Left original zoning petition with Judge Hamilton's clerk. My knees gave out. I sat in the dirt, holding the journal like a sacred object. This wasn't just evidence. This was my father's voice speaking from the grave, reminding me that this fight wasn't just mine. It was ours. We took the box to Maya. She gasped when she read through the documents. "This is a legal time capsule," she whispered. "Your father anticipated this. These original signatures, zoning notes, city acknowledgments, they prove everything." At the next court hearing, Maya presented the box as new evidence. The judge paused, reviewed the notebook carefully, and then, for the first time since this began, he looked directly at the developer's lawyer and said, "You're trying to demolish a historically protected landmark. That's not just unethical, it's illegal." Cheers broke out in the courtroom. The lawsuit from Heritage Realty Group. Dismissed. Our countersuit. Approved for further review. The grove was declared untouchable, permanently zoned as a historical green space, never to be sold, bought, or built upon. My name was cleared. But the fight wasn't over. Because when I returned home that night, my house had been broken into. Again. But this time, nothing was taken. Instead, something was left behind. A small slip of paper on my bed. In shaky handwriting, it read, "If you won't move, we'll bury you in Lot 19. I held the note in my hand, reading the words over and over. "If you won't move, we'll bury you in Lot 19. My pulse slowed, not sped up. My fear didn't rise, it sharpened. The threats had grown darker, more personal. This wasn't just about land anymore. This was about me. Thomas stood behind me, silent, his jaw locked so tight I thought he'd snap a tooth. He took the note gently, examined it, and whispered, "They're escalating." "They're desperate," I corrected. We both knew what that meant. We were winning. But it also meant we had to be smarter. I called Maya and the police immediately. They dusted for prints, but like the others, gloves. No match. No forced entry either. Whoever left it knew how to pick locks or had a key. That narrowed it down. The new HOA board held an emergency session the next morning. I showed them the note. Rosa's face went pale and Mr. Levi slammed his palm on the table. "They want to scare you into running, but not on my watch." We increased the security on my home, reinforced locks, alarms, even installed motion lights around the grove. Neighbors began taking turns watching my property at night. They brought lawn chairs, thermoses of coffee, even snacks. It was no longer my fight. It had become our stand. That weekend, We planned a community memory day at the Grove. Not a protest, not a rally. A celebration. We invited every resident in Pine Hills. Flyers were passed. Rosa posted it on the neighborhood app. Children helped decorate with colorful chalk drawings on the sidewalks. We put up a banner that read, "Pine Hills Remembers." People came with folding chairs, old photographs, stories, and tears. Mrs. Greenwood read a poem she wrote for my father. A teenager named Jordan performed an original song on his guitar called "Roots Don't Run." And I stood at the center of the grove, under the shade of the same tree my father planted decades ago, and read from his journal. "I built this place for people to breathe, to dream, to belong. Let it never become a place of fear." The applause was long and warm. There were hugs, smiles, hope. But that night, hope was tested again. It was around 2:00 a.m. I was sleeping lightly when I heard it. Boom! The floor shook. Then again. Boom! I scrambled out of bed. Thomas had already rushed from the guest room. We ran outside. At the edge of the grove, a fire glowed in the dark. It wasn't the trees. It was the bench, our bench, the one we made from the oak tree. Engulfed in flames. The plaque was gone, ripped off. Spray painted nearby on a tree trunk were 3 words. "This is war." Thomas rushed to grab the fire extinguisher. I called 911. By the time firefighters arrived, most of the flames were out. But the bench was gone. Ashes. Burned to blackened stumps. I stood there barefoot, heart shattered. The entire neighborhood began to gather. One by one, people came out in robes, pajamas, slippers, some with kids in their arms, others with flashlights. No one spoke. We all just stared. And then someone from the back shouted, "No more." It was Malik, the father whose daughter's swing set had once been removed by Clarice's HOA rule. He stepped forward, voice shaking. "We can't wait anymore. This isn't just vandalism, it's domestic terrorism. This is our home, and they want to rip it from under us." People began to murmur, then agree. Rosa stepped up next. "Enough is enough. It's time we find out who's behind this, once and for all." Then came Mrs. Greenwood, shuffling forward on her walker. She held up her phone. "I think I have something," she said. Everyone turned. She pulled up a photo, taken from her living room camera. It faced the street. And there, at 1:46 a.m., was a black SUV parked beside the grove. Out stepped a figure in a dark coat. Face barely visible. But enough. Clarice. The police took the photo as evidence. Combined with her previous ties to the developers, her prior threats, and the fraudulent company registration, warrants were issued. 2 days later, Clarice was arrested at her cousin's house in the next town over. Inside her laptop were emails, hundreds of them between her and a man named Warren G. Dalton. He was the CEO of Dalton and Crest Realty, a massive development firm based in Atlanta. It was his company that secretly bankrolled Heritage Realty Group. They had targeted Pine Hills as part of a larger plan called the Suburban Flip, a scheme to buy out old neighborhoods, erase their history, and sell them as luxury estates with clean narratives. Clarice had been their eyes and ears in Pine Hills. Brent just her hammer. The goal? To remove original landowners, override zoning protections, and quietly replace community culture with commercial appeal. They nearly succeeded. But nearly wasn't enough. With evidence in hand, Maya filed a class action lawsuit on behalf of the residents. Dalton and Crest Realty was now under federal investigation for conspiracy, land fraud, harassment, and bribery of local officials. Clarice faced charges for vandalism, forgery, and conspiracy. Brent, already in custody, flipped and agreed to testify against the firm. The dam had broken, and light was flooding in. But not all battles end in courtrooms. Some end in living rooms. Quiet still and heavy with reflection. I sat on my couch one evening, journal in hand, staring at a photograph of my father. The firelight flickered beside me. I could still hear the crackling of the destroyed bench. Thomas came in, carrying 2 mugs of tea. "You okay, Dad?" I nodded slowly. "Yeah, just tired." He sat beside me. For a while, we just sipped tea in silence. Then I said, "You know, your grandfather used to say something. Land without legacy is just dirt." Thomas smiled. "And we've got a whole neighborhood built on legacy." "I don't want it to be forgotten," I whispered. "It won't," he said, "not if we keep telling the story." And so we did. We rebuilt the bench. But this time, we made it bigger. Neighbors helped cut the wood. Artists in the neighborhood carved the faces of original residents into the legs. The plaque read, "In honor of those who built with heart, protected by those who love with fire." And beneath it, Walter D. Langston, son of the foundation. Gerald Langston, father of Pine Hills. Weeks passed. Then months. Peace slowly returned. The grove stood stronger. The new HOA board enacted protection laws that would last generations. The kids ran again, the chalk drawings came back, porch swings swayed. But one morning, I received a letter. No threat this time. Just a short message. Typed, "Neat. You won this round. But land changes hands. We'll be watching." The foundation. No return address. No name. But I knew what it meant. This wasn't just about Pine Hills anymore. This was a movement. And I would be ready. Always. Because legacy doesn't just live in buildings. It lives in people willing to protect them. The letter stayed on my kitchen table for 3 days. You won this round. But land changes hands. We'll be watching. The foundation. The words weren't a threat, they were a promise. A slow, patient whisper from the shadows that told me, we're not done with you. I kept it in a plastic sleeve beside my father's journal. Thomas wanted to turn it over to the police. Maya wanted to add it to our federal case against Dalton and Crest Realty. I agreed to both, but deep inside, I knew this battle had grown into something more than a neighborhood dispute. This wasn't just about Pine Hills anymore. It was a test of how far people would go to protect power, and how much further we had to go to protect home. And yet for a brief moment, peace returned. No more fire, no more threats, no more bulldozers lurking at dawn. The grove stood undisturbed. Families returned to their evening walks. Our bench became a landmark. Neighbors came to sit on it just to feel part of something greater. But peace is not the end of the story. It's just the breath before the next storm. The first raindrop came as a legal notice. Not to me, but to the HOA. A permit request had been filed for infrastructure upgrades on the land adjacent to Pine Hills, near the back road. The proposed name of the project: the Foundation Heights Expansion. It was subtle, sneaky. No developer name attached, just a request for sewer extension, sidewalk widening, and future entryway enhancements. But Rosa knew the signs. Mr. Levi did too. They called an emergency board meeting, and I attended. Maya dialed in via video call. "This is how they do it," she said, pointing at the permit through the screen. "They nibble, they don't bite. First it's pipes, then sidewalks. Then suddenly you've got luxury townhomes and you're staring at a Target instead of a park." I leaned forward. "They've been kicked out once. How can they file anything again?" "They're using front companies," Maya explained. "They'll cycle names, create new LLCs, and hide behind dummy directors. It's legal. Immoral, but legal." "What can we do?" Rosa asked. "Object," Maya said, loudly, legally, publicly, and build a paper wall so high they'd have to spend years climbing over it. So we did. Over the next 2 weeks, we buried them in paperwork. We hosted community forums. We gathered over 600 signatures. We contacted local media again, retelling the story of Pine Hills, the grove, the threats, the lawsuits, the legacy. Thomas helped a teenager named Alicia edit a documentary from all the footage he'd collected. It was raw, powerful, and ended with my father's voice from a long-lost audio tape I found in the journal box. "Land is not just soil, it's story. Don't ever let them write you out of it." The documentary went viral online. National news picked it up. Even the mayor got involved. The Foundation Heights permit was revoked temporarily. We celebrated. But like I said, in peace is just the breath before the storm. Because then, someone leaked my entire financial records online. Bank statements, retirement savings, even my pension payouts. It wasn't just humiliating, it was dangerous. Suddenly, I was getting calls from strangers, emails offering to buy the Grove, messages pretending to be from government offices. Thomas installed firewalls on my devices. Maya filed a digital harassment report. But the truth was out. I didn't have much money left. And they knew it. They were trying to wear me down. Bleed me dry. Buy me out. I received another letter a week later. Typed no signature. Everyone has a price. You can't fight us forever. $2 million, walk away. Or your legacy burns again. It came with a cashier's check. Real. Dated. Signed by a holding company traced back to a Delaware shell. Thomas stared at the check in disbelief. $2 million, that's enough to buy 3 homes, retire anywhere, live like a king. I looked at him. I already am a king, right here. I tore the check in half. Then into quarters. Then tossed it in the fireplace. We watched it burn. I didn't need their money. I needed truth. So I called Maya. And I said 6 words. It's time to go national, Maya. Within 10 days, we hosted the Legacy Defense Summit, right in Pine Hills. We invited neighborhoods from across the state that had suffered similar attacks from developers, crooked HOAs, and legal manipulation. People drove in from cities, suburbs, even rural towns. Veterans, retired teachers, young families, immigrants, grandmothers. All with one shared story. They tried to buy us out. They tried to erase us. I gave the keynote speech. Stood on the Grove bench with my father's journal in one hand and the burned note in the other. This isn't just about Pine Hills, I said, voice strong despite the lump in my throat. It's about every neighborhood they've tried to rewrite. It's about every community they've tried to rename, redevelop, or erase. We are not for sale. The applause shook the leaves in the trees. We formed a coalition. A network of legal defenders, activists, architects, civil engineers, and city planners ready to fight back. And we named it after the very thing they wanted to destroy. The Memory Grove Foundation. Maya became its legal director. Thomas began building the website. And me. I became its first living symbol. But power doesn't surrender quietly. 2 nights after the summit, just as I returned home from a late dinner with Rosa and the Crawfords, I found my house door open. The lights were on. I stepped inside slowly. No signs of forced entry. No drawers opened. No valuables missing. Just one thing had changed. In the middle of the living room, placed on my coffee table, was an urn. Cold. Heavy. With a label that read, "Let this be your father's legacy." And inside, ashes. I sank to my knees. It wasn't just intimidation anymore. It was sacrilege. It was mockery. And it was personal. Thomas found me still kneeling when he walked in. He picked up the urn with shaking hands, rage rising in his throat. I looked up at him, tear tracks running down my cheeks. "This is war now," I whispered. He nodded, "Then we fight like family." I sat on the porch the morning after the urn was left in my living room, my hands gripping my cane tighter than ever before. The air in Pine Hills was heavy, like even the trees were holding their breath. For weeks we had fought back against every threat, every shady attempt to erase this community, and yet they found a new way to make it personal. First the bricks, then the spray paint, then the sabotage. But that urn, that was a message louder than all of them combined. And I'd heard it loud and clear. But I didn't flinch. I brewed my tea, same as every morning, and sipped it slowly as the sun began to rise. I wasn't going to let them see fear in me. Not now. Not ever. Thomas came out holding his phone. His face was pale. "They posted something," he said. My stomach dropped. What is it now? He held the screen up to me. There, on a fake Facebook account made to look like a Pine Hills community page, was a manipulated image of me, my face superimposed on the front of a funeral brochure. The caption: "Legacy ends here. Final service for Walter Langston, coming soon." A cold wave passed through me. "I've already reported it," Thomas added quickly. "Maya's on it, the feds too. They said they're tightening digital surveillance." I nodded but stayed silent. Because deep down, I knew what this meant. They weren't just trying to make me leave. They were trying to scare me into silence. But I had already buried my wife, my parents, and many good friends. I wasn't afraid of dying. What I feared was not fighting. What I feared was letting them win. Later that day, Maya called a press conference. She stood in front of the Grove with reporters, activists, city officials, and over 100 residents at her back. Even the mayor sent a representative. The message was simple. "We know who you are. We see what you're doing. And we will hold you accountable." Then she revealed something none of us expected. The foundation, the secretive entity behind Heritage Realty Group in Dalton and Crest, was tied to a larger real estate conglomerate operating out of Europe. They had dozens of shell companies set up around the world, each designed to acquire land silently, erase histories, and resell them under luxury branding. They had a name for it internally: the Erasure Initiative. Their motto: silence the soil, rewrite the roots. My blood turned to ice. They were trying to turn entire communities, entire histories, into marketable narratives. Pine Hills wasn't a one-off. We were practice. But Maya had evidence: emails, internal memos, offshore accounts. The federal investigation had now grown into an international case. And suddenly, the threat stopped. No more messages, no more break-ins, no more vandalism. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like the silence before a final blow. And it came on a stormy Thursday. The sky turned black by noon. Lightning cracked so close to the Grove it shook the street. Then the power went out. The neighborhood sank into eerie quiet. No hum of ACs, no kids laughing, just wind and waiting. At 2:03 p.m., a black SUV pulled into my driveway. Out stepped a tall, thin man in a gray raincoat, bald, sharp jawline, eyes that didn't blink. He carried a briefcase. No umbrella. He walked straight up to my porch and knocked 3 times. I opened the door slowly. Yes. He smiled, thin and calculated. "Mr. Langston, my name is Anton Vale. I'm here as a final courtesy from the foundation." I didn't invite him in. "I don't do business with criminals," I said flatly. "I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here to make peace." He opened the briefcase. Inside, neatly arranged, were property deeds, bank forms, and another check. This time for $5 million. "I don't want your money," I said, stepping back. He didn't flinch. "You're a brave man," he said, "but bravery doesn't stop progress." I stared at him. "You don't understand. You think this is about land. It's not. It's about memory, about legacy, about people who built something with their hearts, and people like you who want to pave over it." His lips twitched. "History is whatever survives," he said coldly. "You should take the money while you still have time to enjoy it." Thomas stepped outside, so did Rosa, then Mrs. Greenwood, then Levi. One by one, neighbors appeared, lining the sidewalk. Anton Vale looked around, annoyed. "You think they'll protect you?" he said. "They already have." He closed the briefcase. "This conversation is over," I said. He looked at me with eyes so cold they could crack glass. "You've made your decision." He turned, got into the SUV, and drove off. And just like that, he vanished. But the next morning, something happened we didn't expect. A whistleblower, a former employee of Dalton and Crest, leaked thousands of documents to Maya's office. Construction plans, purchase orders, payoff, surveillance logs. Even a photo log showing Clarice, Brent, and Anton standing together in front of a whiteboard labeled Phase 2, Full Acquisition Pine Hills, Lot 19 Anchor Point. There it was. proof they were going to demolish the grove and use it to anchor a commercial development disguised as a historic blend. Maya brought the evidence to federal court. The judge froze all their assets, then ordered the seizure of every property bought under those shell companies across the county, and declared Memory Grove a federal landmark, protected forever. The day that news came, the grove overflowed. Neighbors, friends, visitors, reporters, people from other towns who had followed the fight from the start. We held a dedication ceremony. The mayor unveiled a bronze plaque at the foot of the oldest oak tree. It read, Memory Grove, established 1962. Preserved 2025. In honor of Gerald Langston, defender of community roots. And just below it smaller, Walter D. Langston, son of the soil, who chose legacy over luxury. I didn't cry, but I felt something deeper. Peace. Not the kind that comes from comfort, but the kind that comes from knowing you stood your ground. That night, Thomas and I sat on the bench beneath the tree, fireflies dancing in the dark, neighbors laughing softly nearby. You did it, Pops, he whispered. No, I said, we did. And just when I thought the story had ended, I received one final letter. This time hand-delivered. No envelope. Just a folded sheet of paper placed on my bench. The writing, elegant cursive. The soil remembers. And so do we. We retreat for now. But one day, your children will forget what you protected. And when they do, we'll be back. TF. Thomas read it too. He looked at me, voice calm but sure. Then I guess I'll teach my kids how to remember. 6 months later, the grove was still standing, stronger than ever. The trees bloomed like they'd been waiting for this peace their whole lives. Children ran around barefoot on the soft grass. Elderly neighbors sat under umbrellas with iced tea and stories from the past. New residents arrived, not the kind pushed in by developers, but families who had heard about Pine Hills through the news, the documentary, or word of mouth. They didn't come to change the soul of the place. They came to belong to it. For a while, it felt like the storm had passed. The foundation was being investigated internationally. Their shell companies were crumbling. Clarice and Brent had both turned state's evidence, and Maya was now recognized nationally for her work in protecting historically black neighborhoods. But peace in this world is like a garden, beautiful, delicate, and always needing protection. And even in silence, there are whispers. I knew that, which is why, even though I smiled more now and slept a little easier, I never stopped watching. And I never stopped remembering. One morning, I received an invitation. A real one this time, no threats, no poison tucked in the folds. It was from the mayor's office. They were hosting the Legacy Cities Gala in downtown Atlanta, a gathering of leaders, defenders, and heroes who had stood up to developers and protected their communities. They were honoring me with a Lifetime Achievement Award. I didn't know what to say at first. I didn't need awards. I didn't want a stage. But Thomas looked at me and said, Pops, this isn't just about you. It's about every small-town elder who ever got ignored, every grandmother they tried to bully, every story they tried to bury. If you don't speak, who will? So I agreed. The night of the gala, I wore my father's old tie, dark maroon, with a silver pin shaped like an oak tree. Thomas was my escort. Maya was there too, dressed sharp, powerful, proud. The hall was grand, elegant. But what made it beautiful wasn't the chandeliers or velvet carpets, it was the people. Old janitors from Mississippi, who stopped a stadium from being built on their church land. School teachers from Alabama, who saved a library from demolition. A woman from Baltimore who handcuffed herself to her childhood stoop to keep the city from tearing it down. We were survivors. Builders. Remembers. When my name was called, I walked slowly to the stage, cane in hand, heart full. The crowd stood. Not for me, I knew, but for what I represented. I looked out over them and began. They tried to bulldoze our memories. They tried to pave over our prayers. But what they didn't know is, you can't kill a seed that's already taken root. My father planted more than trees. He planted dignity. And we watered it with truth. That's why we're still here. That's why we'll always be. There was no dry eye in the room. When I stepped down from the stage, people shook my hand, hugged me, took pictures. And as I stood near the back of the room, letting the next honoree speak, I saw him, Anton Vale, in a corner, alone. No badge, no title, just eyes. He looked older now, less polished, his suit a little wrinkled. But he was watching. Not threatening, just watching. And when our eyes met, he nodded. Not in respect, but in acknowledgement. As if to say, we'll meet again. I nodded back. As if to answer, yes, and I'll be ready. Back in Pine Hills, the seasons changed. The leaves turned gold and fell. Children grew taller. Gardens bloomed again. The bench under the oak tree remained sturdy. But something else grew too. The Memory Grove Foundation expanded. Other neighborhoods joined. We began offering grants, legal help, and public training on how to protect vulnerable communities from corporate manipulation. We didn't just fight now. We taught others how to fight. Maya became a national voice. Thomas opened an office in Atlanta to help tech communities build digital tools for land defense. And me. I kept my porch, my tea, my morning walks. But I also wrote. I turned my father's journal into a book, Son of the Soil, a memoir about legacy, resistance, and the war for memory. It became required reading in several high schools. Students started coming to the Grove on field trips, listening, asking questions. One little girl, maybe 8 years old, asked me, "Mr. Langston, is the tree magic?" I smiled. Yes, baby, because it remembers what most people forget. She sat down and traced the bark with her tiny fingers. And I knew then. We had won. Not because we destroyed the enemy, but because we planted something they could never uproot. Years passed. My steps got slower. My porch became my pulpit. I wasn't trying to hold back time. I was just making sure it didn't steal what mattered most. One morning, Thomas came over with his daughter, my granddaughter, Nia. She climbed onto my lap and whispered, "Daddy says this is our tree." I looked at her and smiled. "No, baby, this tree belongs to everyone, but your great-granddaddy planted it for people like you." She looked up, eyes wide. "For me. For every child who needs to know that where they come from matters." She sat quietly for a while, then asked, "What if bad people come back?" I leaned down, kissed her forehead, and said softly, "Then you remind them that the soil still remembers." And that's how the story ends. Not with war, but with roots. Where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. And if you believe in legacy, tap that like button, share this story, and tell us what community means to you.